And we are here. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the Lopes Goes Last podcast. I, of course, am your host, Tyler Lopes. If you have not subscribed yet, please feel free to do so. Also, hit that bell icon so you never miss any one of my videos. Also, please like and share this video so we can help this podcast grow. And follow me on Facebook and Twitter. That'll be at Lopes Goes Last podcast on Facebook and at Lopes Goes Last on Twitter. So this week, obviously, going to look a little bit different. Podcast did not come out on Friday because I have this monstrosity planned for you today. I have no idea how long it's going to be or how short it's going to be, so I guess monstrosity may not be the most accurate of term right now as it stands, but for all of you guys, what I have decided to do is I have decided to take every single major league free agency move and kind of break it down for you guys, give my letter grade, give my reasoning as to why I think the trade is a good trade, a bad trade, or the signing's a good signing or bad signing, whatever it may be. I'm going to kind of give my grade for all of those signings. Now, there may be some that I have missed, but there are tons. And just so you guys know, I do have notes here. I try to not really have a lot of notes anymore because I find it a little bit less authentic. I find it a little bit more robotic. But quite frankly, I have to have notes for this one, guys, or else I'm not going to get through it. I'm not going to remember all these grades. I'm not going to remember all of my reasonings for it off the top of my head. So if you guys see me looking down at my notes a lot more this episode, I do apologize for that if that bothers some people, because it bothers me a little bit too. But I will say, it's just a necessity for this. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I have to have these, or else it's just going to basically be me making a whole bunch of stuff up, and that's not going to go over well. That's never really good to do. So that's just a little warning for you guys. But again, every single Major League Baseball free agency move, the trades, the signings, whatever it is, obviously, like non-tenders or whatever like that, or people accepting the qualifying offer like Martin Perez or Jock Peterson, they're not going to be in this video, although I did just mention them, obviously. But the point is, it's going to be the signings or the trades that have happened over the last week or so. Maybe 2 weeks at this point. So I'm really excited about this. I hope you guys are excited too. This probably will be a long one because I do have a lot of things that I'm going to talk about. There are a lot of moves to discuss. And certainly I'm going to be taking a deeper dive into some of these moves. Some of them obviously don't really need to be dove into, very deeply, but some of them definitely do. And that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm going to be doing. So once again, I hope you guys are very, very excited because I know I am. I've been waiting to do this for quite a while, and it's taken a lot longer than I anticipated to gather all my notes and gather all my thoughts for this because there was just such a large number of deals going on and a lot of them that have storylines to them and have reasons for them that are exciting that I really want to dive in for you guys. So I'd rather take a little bit longer to come out than me try to push it out on Friday night and have it be not as good. So hopefully you guys are happy whenever you get this, whenever you see this. And without further ado, here we go. So the first move I want to talk about. By the way, actually, before I jump in, there might be some chronological order for this, but it's really not going to be super chronological as far as I'm concerned. We're going to talk about the Red Sox moves, as well as the Xander Bogaerts move at the end of the podcast. And I will probably link that timestamp in the description for those of you who are just here for the Red Sox stuff. But we're going to be diving into moves from every team, all the way from the Pirates to the Yankees. So every move that I've seen, I'm going to be diving into. But again, the Red Sox stuff's going to kind of be at the end. So obviously, that won't work chronologically. But for the most part, I tried to keep it somewhat chronological. But I'm sure it's going to be way, way off, especially if, you have 15 moves in one day. Whatever ones came out at certain times, I have no idea. But the point being, there isn't a super, it's not going to be, in exact order. But I did the best I could with it. So either way, I hope you guys enjoy it. Here we go. First move I want to talk about is going to be what I know to be the first move or major move of the offseason. That is Edwin Diaz re-signing with the Mets on a 5-year, $102 million contract. Very first move, right off the bat, I promise I have not given very many of these in this video, you'll see. But an A+ for me right there. What a difference a few years makes. Quite frankly, 3 years ago, 2019, 2020, Mets fans are ready to put Edwin Diaz on a guillotine. And now, quite frankly, he might be one of the best, if not the very best closers in all of baseball. He's a fan favorite, and he's an absolute necessity for the Mets if they're going to continue to pursue a championship, which I know that they are. It was an absolute must to re-sign him at this point. And again, like I said, he is such a big fan favorite. His entrance into the onto the field has gotten a lot of mainstream appeal, and is certainly popular among baseball fans as one of the best kind of walkout entrances for closers or for pitchers or for whoever in the entire sport of baseball right now. So Mets fans love him. The Mets organization loves him, and it's certainly great to see Edwin Diaz in prime form. So I just think that this was it was almost a justice kind of move for the Mets. It's the best thing that could have happened for both player and for the organization. So I think that this is something that had to get done, and I look forward to seeing what Edwin Diaz is going to do, not only this year, but in years to come, because, again, he's one of the best closers in baseball. He's certainly turned his career around from that god-awful 2019 that he had, where it really looked like he was just going to fall off the face of the earth, like a lot of relievers have done over the years, but luckily it does not seem to be the case as of right now, so hopefully we continue to see that as time goes along, and again, A+ from me for Edwin Diaz. Next up, the Padres sign Robert Suarez, another reliever, to another 5-year contract, although this time significantly less money at $46 million total. Right off the bat, I'm going to give this a B. Now, I don't think it necessarily has to do with Robert Suarez's year last year. He had a really, really good year last year, with a ERA right around 2.3. But here's the thing. He's only played 1 year at the major league level. He's already 31 years old. And so to me, I think that this deal does come with a pretty reasonable amount of risk. So I can't really give this move an A because it's not a slam dunk to me. Now, obviously, all deals have risk, right? And all of them hinge on how a player ends up actually performing or if they stay healthy, whatever the case is. But on the surface, you can see more risks with certain players than you can others. Edwin Diaz has not had a ton of injury history. He's performed at a high level year after year after year with only 1 or 2 exceptions. And when he is at the top of his game, he's absolutely phenomenal. Now, Robert Suarez had a fantastic year last year for the Padres. He was one of their, if not their most effective pitcher out of the bullpen last year. Even with Josh Hader in town, Hader performed really, really poorly last year once he went to the Padres. But Suarez had a great year all year. And so I understand the Padres wanting to lock him down. And, less than $10 million a year for a guy who could possibly be your setup guy or maybe even your closer if it doesn't work out with Hader long term. That's that's honestly a really, really good price. However, you are still staking yourself long term to a guy who only has 1 year, and it was last year, in the majors. And, again, he's 31 years old, so at any point that arm could start to show a lot of fatigue because, guys have been pitching for 10, 15, 20 years at this point if you're getting to be that age. So, to me, again, he had an incredibly effective year last year, and he had a great year, so he was bound to get a pay raise, but I do think that there is some risk here taken by the Padres, but it's a risk in good faith, which I think it's always nice to see an organization show. They're showing faith in a guy that, yes, he may be 31. Yes, he may have only had 1 good year or 1 total year in the majors, but I think this guy's got potential, so let's show him how much we appreciate him by giving him a long-term deal. I think it's nice, but again, only going to be a B from me because of that inherent risk there. Another reliever. I promise we're not going to only talk about relievers, but these first handful are going to be relievers here. Rafael Montero re-signs with the Houston Astros, 3 years, $34.5 million deal. I'm going to give this a C-. To me, Rafael Montero is arguably the most inconsistent and boom or bust relievers that I have seen in the last decade. Rafael Montero, again, had a great year last year. Another guy that had a really, really solid year last year, so I can understand the Astros wanting to keep him in town. However, even just putting his career numbers aside, which if you look on Baseball Reference and you see his career numbers and you kind of really take a deep dive into his advanced statistics, and not only his advanced statistics, but just his basic statistics, his strikeouts, his ERA, his walks, all that stuff, it's really inconsistent. But even leaving all the career numbers aside, just take a look at the 2021 season versus 2022. And right there, that's going to tell you how inconsistent this guy is. Even if you don't look at the rest of his career, which again, that will also show you how inconsistent he is. But let's just take a look at 2021. An ERA over 6 in 2021 for both the Mariners and the Astros. And then last year, a ERA under 3. So, I mean, that's pretty much what you're getting with Rafael Montero. He's had a couple of good years. He had a good year with the Rangers in 2019. 2020, 2021 didn't have that great a year, although I'm willing to forgive 2020 considering it was the COVID year. And then, of course, 2021 wasn't very good. 2018 wasn't very good. 2017 wasn't very good. So it just... He's very, very inconsistent, and that's the point, is when a guy is that inconsistent, that's one of the last guys that I would certainly want in my bullpen, is literally when you wake up and you have no idea what you're going to get out of a guy. So for me, the only reason that this is even in the C range is because he had such a good year last year. I think the Astros had to keep him, and the price that they paid for a guy that is going to be in the back end of their bullpen, considering what other closers in baseball are making right now, it's not the worst contract. Just above $11 million a year is really, really cheap, especially considering some of the other deals going on in the MLB right now in terms of relievers, like Kenley Jansen, who we'll get to later on, obviously, towards the end. But for me, I think that it's really, really risky when you have a guy that you really just have no idea. Now, he seems to have found a home in Houston. When he was traded to Houston last year, he only pitched a few times, but he didn't give up an earned run in those appearances. And then last year, obviously, with a full season in Houston and in the postseason and in the World Series, he had a great year. Certainly had a fantastic year last year. There is no discussion about that. He did. But I am worried for a guy that, again, he's also 32 years old, and he's been in the majors. Unlike Robert Suarez, he has been in the league for 8 years, and those 8 years have been very, very inconsistent. So for me, I think that the two deals between Suarez and Montero, while they are not similar in terms of their player history, I think that they are similar in terms of contract structure and in terms of what that team is trying to say to that player. But for me, Rafael Montero is not nearly as valuable to the Astros as Robert Suarez may be for the Padres. Now again, Montero may have found something later in his career here that will flip the switch and he'll be very effective for the rest of the time that he is with the Astros. And if that's the case, then this is a great contract for them. But right now, I have to give a grade just based off of a snap reaction without seeing them play. That's just how this works. And for me, a C- I think is fair. Going back to the Padres here, they signed Nick Martinez to a 3-year deal. Now, this contract is a little bit wonky here. He's going to make $10 million in this upcoming season, and then he will make anywhere from $8 to about $16 million for year 2 and year 3, depending on incentives and depending on how well he pitches. So it is a little bit weird. So the final number isn't really, it isn't necessarily a concrete final number, but that's about what he'll be making. So, let's just say he averages 10 to 12 mil a year, which I think is probably fair. I think if he pitches well, it'll end up being about 3 years, 36 million. I think that's probably a fair assessment for this. But nonetheless, I'm glad that the Padres see his value. I'm going to give this a B. He's certainly not the best pitcher in the world. And, when a guy can't stick in the rotation, that usually kind of has something to do with his effectiveness. And again, Nick Martinez, not the greatest pitcher in the world, but I still think he is valuable for a team like the Padres. He gives them starting rotation depth, and he gives their bullpen depth by being a multi-inning guy that you could throw out there if one of your starters has a bad day. He can give you 3 innings, 4 innings, no problem. And then obviously you can make some spot starts here and there if injuries pile up or if your schedule starts to get really, really crazy. You start having, 12 games in 13 days. 15 games in 16 days, it starts to wear on you, especially in today's baseball where, health and arm injuries and all that stuff is just so vital and important for teams to kind of watch out for. We're just in a different time now. It's not like back in the 1800s or in the early 1900s where you got 2 starters on your whole team and they throw 9 innings or 12 innings every single time if it goes into extras, and that's that. You don't really have any relievers. The only reason you'd have a reliever is if your starter absolutely stunk that day. And even if he absolutely stunk that day, he would still pitch 7 innings because, you just needed to save your arms. So, for me, I think this is a really, really good value deal for the Padres. I think if he's going to be a quality starter and a quality reliever for you, 10 to 12 mil a year is about where you want to be. So I think B is a fair grade for that. The Dodgers, moving on to another team in the NL West. The Dodgers re-signed Clayton Kershaw, 1 year, $20 million. Nice and straightforward there for you. Clayton Kershaw sticks around in LA where he spent his entire career, where he's obviously forged a first ballot, at least in my opinion, Hall of Fame career at this point. A- for me. Great deal for the Dodgers, quite frankly. Kershaw, he is getting up there in age, so, $20 million for a guy that's really getting up there. I think he's 35 at this point, somewhere around there. You guys can check me on that, obviously, but we all agree he's getting up there in age. He's not the guy he used to be. So $20 million, that is him taking a pay cut, which is nice, but I still think $20 million may be a little bit too much, especially the injuries are starting to pile up, and again, he's getting up there in age, but I just feel like Kershaw's a guy that just needs to be an LA Dodger for life. You don't really see that a lot in sports anymore. A guy that's going to stick around one franchise for his whole career. No matter how much you are beloved by a franchise, typically you are going to leave in free agency or they're going to trade you. Something's going to happen where you're not going to stay on a team for your entire career. But I think Kershaw could be that guy that does that, as long as he's willing to kind of be honest with himself and take pay cuts year in and year out as he starts to get older and as the injuries start to pile up and as he starts to lose a little bit of velocity, starts to lose a little bit of effectiveness. I think that this is a great deal for the Dodgers. And again, I just think he needs to be a lifer. So good for the Dodgers for making sure he doesn't go anywhere. And next up, again, A- for that one. Next up, Mariners trade Eric Swanson and Adam Macko to the Blue Jays for Teoscar Hernandez. So here is going to be an unpopular opinion here. I can already tell. I'm going to give the Mariners a C+ for this trade here. Quite frankly, I don't necessarily see Hernandez as a great fit for the Mariners. And the reason why I say that is multifold. Jesse Winker wasn't really a great fit for the Mariners. And obviously, while Winker's a left-handed bat and Hernandez is a right-handed bat, they are very similar players in terms of what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. Obviously, Winker's not a plus base runner. Winker's not a plus defender. Neither is Hernandez. Hernandez is more of a power guy that's going to hit about 250 to 260, maybe up to 280, just like Winker. And again, that experiment kind of failed for Seattle there. So I don't really understand why the Mariners felt the need to do that, and I also think that unless I'm mistaken, Jesse Winker is a cheaper option than Teoscar Hernandez. But either way, the point is, I just don't see the fit here. I think Winker is also a better player if you kind of put both when they're both completely healthy. I would rather at least have Winker than I would rather have Hernandez, but again, that's up for opinion, right? But Hernandez did have a better year than Jesse Winker last year, obviously. But again, he's not a plus defender. He's not really a plus base runner, but given what the Seattle Mariners got in the trade for that they traded away Jesse Winker, which we'll get into here in a little bit, I think that Hernandez is a pretty similar player. So you know what? If he could get back to his 2021 form where he had 35 home runs, over 100 RBIs, this could be a nice little steal for the Mariners. But I think right now, C+ is where I'm going to go for that for the Mariners. And on the Blue Jays side, I'm going to give them a B to start out here. This grade probably would have been worse if I had done this grade, right away. It probably would have been a C-, maybe even a D+, because I just don't think they got a ton of value for a guy who, again, hit 35 home runs for them in 2021. I thought they could have gotten more for him. But also, they did sign Kevin Kiermaier this offseason to really fill that hole that Teoscar Hernandez would have left. And I think that he's a better fit for what they need right now. And again, I'll get into more of that later on. But I just felt like a trade was probably inevitable for Teoscar Hernandez. I just didn't see the fit in Toronto. I think getting rid of Teoscar Hernandez is really what they needed to do to kind of take the next step. Getting a guy like Kiermaier definitely helps with that. So knowing what I know now, this is going to be a B. But again, like I would have said, if I had done this grade before the Kevin Kiermaier signing, it probably would have not been a great value trade for the Blue Jays. Would have been probably a C- if I had to give a grade there. But for this video's purposes, a B is what I am going to give them. Moving on to a handful of Los Angeles Angels stuff here. They were obviously pretty busy early on in free agency. They started off by signing Tyler Anderson to a 3-year, $39 million contract. I'm going to give this one a B. And the reason is this just stinks of the usual Angels jargon that happens in the offseason for me. Signing a guy who's not necessarily an ace that you're going to slightly overpay because you just need pitching. He's going to go there. He's going to be moderately to barely effective, and then he's going to leave. That's just kind of what it stinks for me. But again, the Angels just need pitching at this point. Nothing that they seem to try works, and I guess they just utterly refuse to sign any of the big-name free agents like a Jacob deGrom or a Justin Verlander or any of these guys that will really solidify the top of their rotation. They just refuse to do that, obviously, so if they're just going to continue down this road of paying $15 to $20 million for a couple of guys to come in there and be average to slightly above average, maybe even slightly below average, depending on the year and depending on the person, then they're going to get a slightly above average grade, which I think a B is fair, considering Anderson did have a really good year last year. And obviously, Angel Stadium is a bit of a pitcher's ballpark, so we'll see if Anderson can kind of continue that resurgence of his career. And again, the Angels do just need pitching in general, so a B I think is fair. Now, again, the Angels are making more moves. They traded minor league pitcher Alejandro Hidalgo for Gio Urshela. So Urshela leaving the Twins, going to the Angels. For the Angels, I'm going to give them another B here. So back-to-back Bs for the Angels. He's a very versatile infielder. He's got solid on-base numbers, solid batting average numbers, and has a bit of pop in the bat. But for me, I think this is kind of just more lateral. I'm not sure how much better this necessarily makes you if you're the Angels at this point. And again, you traded more pitching, which, I know that they took 15,000 pitchers a couple of years ago in the draft. If you guys remember, the Angels became the first team ever to literally use every single one of their draft picks in a draft on pitchers. They didn't draft a single position player in an entire draft. So certainly they have a plethora of minor league pitchers, but the guy that they traded, Alejandro Hidalgo, is only 19 years old. He didn't have the best year in Double-A last year, but he's 19 years old. He's got a wicked fastball. So for me, I just think that you probably gave up on this kid a little bit too quickly for a guy that is not going to get any better in Gio Urshela, who's already 30 years old. And, he's not a guy that's going to bring you any closer to what your goal is. So for me, I think that a B is fair because, again, they did need more infield help. They did need more major league ready talent in that lineup because the lineup just did not perform very well last year outside of a few players. Obviously Trout, obviously Ohtani. Taylor Ward had a nice year, but other than that, it just really hasn't been great. So again, a B I think is fair. And for the Twins, I'm actually going to give this an A. And the reason is because later on I'll talk about how they actually they traded for Kyle Farmer. And you know what? Actually, instead of later on, I'm just going to go into that here. They traded for Kyle Farmer, and for me, I think it's really great. They traded just a minor league relief pitcher for Kyle Farmer. I can't remember the person's name, but for me, I think that Kyle Farmer is an undervalued player, honestly. And I think that he does a lot of the same things that Urshela can do, albeit a little bit less productive on the offensive side. But certainly he's very, very he's very versatile. He's played shortstop. He's caught. He can play third, second, first. He can play all over the place. Outfield, obviously. So he can pretty much play every position on the field. So I think that, getting a cheaper option in Kyle Farmer and getting, obviously, Alejandro Hidalgo from the Angels, a guy that, you're hoping can, as he gets older, develop into a possibly top-of-the-line starter for the Twins, if not, at the very least, a middle-of-the-road starter that, is a cheap option that'll give you solid numbers every year. I think it's a really solid trade for the Twins as they continue to really spark that rebuild that's going on in Minnesota, and I think that moves like this are perfect for what they need. You got a guy that has value, get some high value or at least mid-value prospects, get some young guys that you feel like can develop in a few years so that when your team is ready to start competing, they will be ready to start pitching at a high level or playing at a high level, obviously, if it's a position player. So I think I'm going to give this an A. This is a really, really nice move for the Twins. And again, Kyle Farmer, he represents, his addition kind of represents a cheaper option for a similar value as what Gio Urshela was getting. So I think all around, good job for the Twins. Next up, the Brewers swing a pretty interesting trade. They traded Hunter Renfroe to the Angels. So again, more Angels stuff going on here for 3 minor league pitchers, including Jansen Junk. And Hunter Renfroe is right now on a 1-year contract. So for the Twins, or not the Twins, excuse me, for the for the Angels, he may only be around for 1 season, so it's not like they're getting multiple seasons of Hunter Renfroe, at least not yet, without a contract extension or some kind of re-signing. Right now, I'm going to give the Angels a B-. That is my grade for that. That lineup, again, needs a lot of help. They need certainly some outfield help. But for me, again, I think Jansen Junk and Peguero, who is another guy that they got for... in that, or another guy that they gave up in that trade. I think they, quite frankly, both could have really, really helped this year in the rotation. Now, they both have had major league experience at this point, and neither of them have done particularly great, but they're both still young, up-and-coming pitchers, so I feel like, if you're the Angels, you really need pitching too. You may want to take a chance on at least one of those guys panning out for you, maybe trading one of those two for Renfroe and leaving the other one and seeing which one of them pans out. And again, a guy, Jansen Junk, I mean, what better pitcher name is that? I don't really know of one, but the point is, I think that they could have helped either in the rotation or in the bullpen this year. At least one of them probably could have. But unfortunately, we're not going to find out because they are obviously going to the Brewers in this trade. So, but again, Renfroe is a good player, and he's had steady power and productivity over the last couple of seasons, which steady productivity is really what the Angels need right now outside of Ohtani and Trout. They're really taking all these high-risk guys. Obviously Anthony Rendon hasn't worked out so far, and their young outfielders haven't panned out either. So for me, I think that this is a really good move to kind of give some stability in the middle of that lineup. Hunter Renfroe is, we'll knock on wood here. He's stayed pretty healthy throughout his career, so we're hoping that he does well. So B-, I think, is the way to go there. Brewers, I'm going to give them a D. I don't like this trade for the Brewers at all. They really continue to confuse me with what they're doing. I feel like they're trying to start rebuilding, but I don't really know why they're starting to rebuild. I really thought that they had a team that could start competing over the last couple of seasons, but obviously last year they traded Josh Hader. But you still have guys like Christian Yelich on your team. They traded now Colton Wong away, which we'll get into that here in a little bit. So for me, very, very strange here. I don't really know what they're doing. Sometimes it seems like they've completely given up on contending, but yet they've not really fully decided to rebuild because you still have guys that have really high value on your team that you're not trading. So if you are going to rebuild in a small market in Milwaukee, you really just need to blow up the whole thing. But right now, I feel like they're taking incremental steps towards rebuilding. And again, the package that they got back for Renfroe, on the surface might seem okay, but I mean, are these guys going to help you in 3 or 4 years? I'm not really sure yet. So I'm not really sure. They did get prospects out of this one, which in some of the other trades that they've done, they didn't even get that. So I guess that's nice. But again, they really confuse me with what's going on here. So I'm going to give it a D. I didn't like this trade really at all for the Brewers. Carlos Santana signing with the Pittsburgh Pirates. That's up next. 1 year, $6.7 million. I'm actually not going to give a grade on this one. And the reason is because we all know why the Pirates decided to make this decision. And Carlos Santana knows exactly why he's made this decision. And that's because he needs to rebuild his value and he wants a bigger contract next year. And he's going to want to go play for a contender that doesn't want to pay him right now. So he's going to hopefully rebuild his value by getting consistent playing time all the time in Pittsburgh. And hopefully he'll get his stats up, and then the Pirates will eventually flip him at the deadline to, hopefully for him and his sake, as he's getting up there in age, as a lot of the free agents have been. Hopefully he'll go to a contending team. He'll be able to compete for a World Series. So for me, it all depends on how Carlos Santana does. And I know we could say that for obviously every free agent, right? But I mean, even just on the surface of this one, I have no idea what to give this trade because it's not like the Pirates are going anywhere. They refuse to trade Brian Reynolds at this point, which I don't understand why, because he's about the only player on that team that has any value outside of, a Key Brian Hayes, which you're not going to trade because of his age and because obviously he's developing. Or O'Neal Cruz, obviously, again, prospect, age, he's developing. So out of the guys that you really could trade, Reynolds is about the only one you're going to get high value for, and they refuse to trade him, despite the fact that they're rebuilding. So I don't really know. They did the same thing with Jose Quintana last year, so I'm sure the Pirates are hoping to get some good prospects for Carlos Santana, just like they did for Jose Quintana last year. And Jose Quintana, we'll get into him in a little bit here too. He had a really good year last year, but he's been wildly inconsistent, so the fact that they were able to get anything for him, that's great, and I'm sure they're hoping to do the same thing for Santana, so it's all going to depend, even just on the surface, of how Santana performs this year, how I grade this trade. If he performs poorly, then obviously it's going to just be a C, because who cares for all involved, but if he performs really well and the Pirates end up getting a nice prospect for him, I'd give it a B or a B+. Sure, why not? But for right now, to be determined. That is what I will say there. Mike Clevinger signs with the Chicago White Sox for 1 year, $8 million deal. The numbers were kind of all screwed up for me. I don't know how I messed them up so bad in the last couple of videos. I even put in the description of one of my videos, I thought it was 11 mil per year. I'm not really sure at this point. I've seen all different things, but I looked it up, and recently I've seen nothing but 1 year, $8 million. So that's what I'm going to report. But either way, Mike Clevinger is going to be on the White Sox. That's the point. I'm going to give it a B+. I talked about it again in a prior video, but I'll go a little bit more in depth here. B+, again, why not take a chance on Clevinger at this point? He's had a really nice run with the Indians, now the Guardians, obviously. And so, for me, it didn't work out for him in San Diego. The injuries kind of were a little bit buggy for him. But I think that for the White Sox, he's not going to have a lot of pressure to be an ace right away. He's not really going to have pressure to be an ace at all because you got Lance Lynn and Lucas Giolito over there, and obviously Dylan Cease, who's coming into his own at this point. So at the highest value, Clevinger's going to be your fourth starter. $8 million for a fourth starter is not that bad. And even if it was $11 or $12 million, I would still take that if I'm the White Sox at this point because Cease is obviously very cheap. Giolito's very cheap. So at this point, I think it's really, really nice for the White Sox to kind of take a chance on this guy. And again, if Clevinger does perform the way he did in 2018, 2019 for the Guardians, then it's going to be a really, really high-value contract. It's a guy that can have 200-plus strikeouts and a 3 ERA in a year. He's a guy that can make 15, 18, 20, 25 starts in a season. So, we'll see how it goes. I hope it works out for Clevinger and for the White Sox because, obviously, you just want to see good baseball players play good baseball. And when he's healthy, Clevinger is a very good pitcher. So we'll see how that goes. B+ for me right there. And the other deal that I talked about in a prior video is going to be Jose Abreu to the Houston Astros. 3 years, $59 million. I'm going to give it a B-. I talked about this a little bit in the last video that I did, just kind of going over those two moves, specifically Clevinger and now Abreu. And he's getting up there in age. He's 35 years old at this point, and he's coming off a very odd year. Kind of looking at his statistics, his power dropped. He went from 35 or 38, however many it was, home runs in 2021 to only 15 in 2022, which obviously, just looking at that doesn't bode well. But his total hits jumped from about 140 to 180, so he was certainly putting bat to ball a lot better than he was. And his doubles went from 30 to 40, so a 25% increase there. His OPS plus actually went up from his MVP season, which is pretty crazy. So for me, I think that it was an interesting move for the Houston Astros. I'm not ready to give this a B plus or an A grade, and the reason is because I think that if this is the kind of player you're going to get from Jose Abreu, you're basically just getting a bit of a step up from what Yuli Gurriel has been giving you over the last 5 years. Now, you are still getting an upgrade for sure from Yuli Gurriel, but there's kind of an argument to be made where if Yuli was willing to take $8 million and Abreu's making almost $20 million, which one would you rather have? Now, Gurriel had a very down year last year by comparison to 2021. 2021, he was fantastic. Last year, not so much. So maybe you're thinking that Yuli Gurriel is about to fall off a cliff at this point, so you need to upgrade at first base. It's going to give you a few more years. That's totally fine. That's why I'm not giving it a bad grade. I think B- is pretty fair. I do think it is a bit of an overpay. I do still think for a guy who's 35 and a guy whose power did struggle last year, I am a little bit wary, especially toward the back end of this contract. But still an upgrade over what you were having, and if you're the Houston Astros, who cares at this point? I mean, yes, you lost Justin Verlander, which is not good. We'll get into that in a little bit, but for me, they're still going to be one of the best teams in baseball regardless, so, and they're still a World Series favorite at this point, so at this point, what can I say? I mean, they've nailed it pretty much on all aspects at this point, but B- I think is fair. Next up, definitely my favorite deal of the offseason so far. I'm saying that with all sarcasm. Dodgers signed Shelby Miller to a $1.5 million deal. I'm not going to really go into this very much. I'm giving this an F. It is as far as I remember, there may be another one, maybe one more, but I think it's my only F grade of this entire offseason. And those of you who know me will know why. I genuinely don't understand how Shelby Miller is still employed by a baseball team at this point. For those of you who don't know who Shelby Miller is, let's give you a brief synopsis. A few years ago, the Diamondbacks had the number 1 pick in the draft, and they drafted a guy named Dansby Swanson, who has still not yet to sign as of the time I'm recording this, excuse me. So, they drafted Dansby Swanson. Shelby Miller was a pitcher for the Braves. He'd had a really solid year, and the Braves were looking to get some value for him, and somehow they were able to convince the Diamondbacks to trade them the number 1 pick in the draft, Dansby Swanson, who had already been drafted like 5 days before that or 2 weeks before that, whatever it was. They were able to convince them to trade Dansby Swanson for Shelby Miller and a couple of other players. Shelby Miller then proceeded to have 2 of the worst seasons in baseball history in terms of pitching. He was absolutely horrible, and then he's been down in the minor leagues ever since. And obviously Dansby Swanson is probably going to command $150 million this year, if not more, in free agency. So, I don't understand why the guy's still around at this point, but apparently he had a pretty good year in the minor leagues last year, so maybe he can do something with the Dodgers. I mean, the Dodgers are the Dodgers, so we'll see, but the point being, I just don't know why he's still around. That's my thing, and I know it's really harsh, but for me, yeah, it's an F for me. That's just how I feel. And you can fight me on it if you want, but that's just how I feel. The Washington Nationals sign Jaimir Candelario to a 1-year, $5 million contract. I'm going to give this an A-. I like Candelario a lot. I think he's highly undervalued because he doesn't have a ton of power, and he's a third baseman primarily. So, a third baseman that doesn't have a ton of pop and a ton of power is kind of a unicorn in today's baseball, because you've obviously got your power spots, right? First base, your corner outfield spots, third base. Those are typically your power spots in the lineup, where, guys that are a little bit slower but that are going to hit home runs are going to play more often than not. Obviously, you've got some power at every position in baseball nowadays, but point being, typically speaking, your guys that are more keen to hitting home runs are going to play your corner infield spots, including third base. So a guy who doesn't hit a lot of home runs at third base is going to be a little bit undervalued. But to me, he gets on base. He plays reasonably good defense. And for a rebuilding team, such as the Nationals. I think that it's a really, really solid move, and I think that it's good. But the only reason that this isn't really getting an A or an A plus for me is because he did struggle pretty badly last year, but so did everybody that wore a Tigers uniform last year, so I'm going to take that with a grain of salt. I think Candelario is still a good player that can bring a lot of value to a team. So hopefully he'll take this one-year deal. He'll be able to rebuild a little bit of his value with a lot more playing time, and he'll be able to go to a better team next off season. Or even stick on the Nationals and get a bigger contract. Whatever makes the guy happy, I hope it happens for him. So A- for me there. Another move involving the Tigers, although this time signing somebody. The Tigers sign Matt Boyd to a one-year, $10 million contract. Matt Boyd obviously came up through the Tigers organization and pitched for them for a few solid seasons. And, then last year went to the Giants, and now he is back with the Tigers. I'm going to give this a C-, though. For me, it's a huge overpay. I don't think Matt Boyd is worth nearly $10 million a year at this point. And again, you let him go last year because he's underperformed for you, not just in 2021, but pretty much every year. He was a guy that was touted as being the next ace in baseball, and he just has not been that. Now, he has flashed, certainly. He's thrown no-hitters. He's thrown complete games, but he just hasn't been consistent. I feel like for 2 straight years, looking at fantasy baseball, Matt Boyd was either going to give you a complete game, 1 run, 10 strikeouts, or he was going to not last through the first inning. I would literally sit there and watch my team with Matt Boyd on it, and I would just either see, the Tigers winning 1-0 because Tyler Boyd went to, or Tyler Boyd. That's not the same person. Matt Boyd. Matt Boyd goes the distance, or I'm just watching it 1-0 in the first, 2-0 in the first, 4-0 in the first, 6-0 in the first. He gives up 4 home runs in the first inning. It's just, you never know what you were going to get out of him. And he did that all while being on the Tigers. So I'm not really sure why the Tigers would want him back at this point. But you know what? He did have a somewhat solid limited playing time year last year with the Giants. He only threw a couple of games. But for me, that's the only reason why it's not a worse grade than it is, but my instinct is telling me this is going to be more of a repeating history type of deal instead of the, comeback story deal or redemption story deal that I'm sure the Tigers are hoping for. On to a very interesting deal here. The Tampa Bay Rays sign Zach Eflin to a 3-year, $40 million contract. Now, why is that so significant? It's because this is the biggest free agent contract that the Rays have ever given out. If you remember, obviously last year they extended Wander Franco, the Wonder Kid, to $100+ million contract. Which was by far the biggest contract they've ever given out, but he had come up through the organization. So a free agent coming from another organization to the Rays has never gotten a contract more than $40 million, which is really sad considering the contracts that I've already talked about, and that I'm going to talk about later on in this that are way, way past $40 million, obviously, but you know what? Good for the Rays for taking a leap of faith. Sometimes baby steps is what you need, and I think it's really great for the Rays to do this. But I am going to give this just a B because I don't want my emotions to cloud the judgment of the actual analytics and the actual value of this trade. Now, I love that the Rays are spending a little bit of money, and I also love that the Rays are spending a little bit of money on pitching because I think that every team, you can't really ever get enough pitching unless you were the Padres 2 years ago where you had every starter known to man. But the point is, I just don't know if you should have shelled out that money for the specific player that you got. Because Zach Eflin, he's been right about average to slightly below average for the last few seasons. His ERA has hovered right around 4. He's certainly had his share of injuries. So, he's not like he's some super, super young pitcher at this point. So for me, if you're gonna shell out a record-breaking contract for your franchise, is Zach Eflin really the guy that you wanted to do it given the other pitchers on the market at this point? Not Noah Syndergaard or something like that. for me, I just don't know if Zach Eflin is the guy at this point. Again, 4 ERA over the last few seasons, prone to injuries, and quite frankly, he's performed his best while being in the bullpen. And we all know that the Rays don't really need much more bullpen help at this point. They have one of the best bullpens, if not the best bullpen, every single year, full of guys that none of us have ever heard of. And that's a testament to the organization that is the Tampa Bay Rays. And ultimately, the reason why I'm giving a B, why I'm giving a grade so high, is because I am trusting the Rays organization due to their, their history, due to their kind of, reputation at this point of building these guys that a lot of other organizations in baseball don't necessarily see a lot of value in, and they're going to turn them and they're going to get the best out of them. So for me, I'm hoping that happens for the Rays. I hope Zach Eflin finds something in Tampa that he hasn't been able to find in Philly. But for me, I think it was an overpay. But again, I'm giving the Rays the benefit of the doubt, so I'm giving it a B. So Tampa, do not let me down, all right? Because I don't want to look stupid. I'm going to look stupid with enough of this. I don't need to look stupid on that one, okay? The Baltimore Orioles assign Frenchie Cordero. I'm going to give this one a C. I don't really have much of an opinion on it. It's a meh kind of deal for me. He didn't work out with the Sox. They tried to kind of bring him in and do something for him, but a 180 batting average is not going to cut it. So for me, it's just a lateral move for a rebuilding team and a guy that has a little bit of power upside. Nothing really much more to discuss there. Another big trade, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, back to the Brewers. The Brewers, they traded Colton Wong to the Seattle Mariners for Jesse Winker and Abraham Toro. Now, I was very harsh on the Brewers with their last trade. I'm going to be very, 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 very happy for the Brewers here. They are going to get an A for this trade. Now, I know a lot of pundits are going to disagree with that, but please hear me out. Jesse Winker is one of my favorite players in baseball. I think that he's been one of the most undervalued players in baseball over the last handful of seasons. And let's not forget, in 2021, he started the All-Star game for the National League. It's not like he's a slouch. He had a bad year last year. Absolutely. But Jesse Winker, when he is healthy, is one of the best hitters in baseball. And that's not a crazy statement to make. So for me, bringing a guy in like that you're kind of getting on a much lower value. I think if the Reds, you think of what the Reds ended up trying to get for Jesse Winker last year, and we were all shocked. It's like, how can you trade away Jesse Winker for so little? And now, you might even be getting less. You might be giving away less than what the Reds gave up or what the Mariners gave up. And I think you're in pretty good shape here. And plus, you're not just getting Jesse Winker, you're getting Abraham Toro, who did not play particularly great last year and lost his job to Eugenio Suarez at third base, but he's still young. He's still got a lot of potential. So I think this is a huge win for the Brewers. And again, for me, it's another move that the only problem I have with it is it's another move that makes me feel like I don't really know what the Brewers are doing at this point. But it's still a really, really good value for what they got. Colton Wong, really, really good player. Don't get me wrong, and they're certainly going to miss him at second base. But for me, I think that it is the value that you got back. If Jesse Winker and Abraham Toro both really put it all together in Milwaukee, where there's less pressure, Jesse Winker's obviously back in the National League. He's not going to, I highly doubt he's going to be batting leadoff like he was for Seattle for a lot of it. In Milwaukee, I think that really you have got yourself a really, really nice deal there if you are the Brewers. And for the Mariners, B- for me. Wong is a great fit for the Mariners, and for me, the reasons why I loved the trade for the Brewers is the reason why I don't like the trade as much for the Mariners. I love Jesse Winker. I think that he had a bad year last year, and I don't understand why you give up on a guy that has been that talented over the last handful of seasons so quickly. So you did give up a lot of MLB upside if you are the Mariners, because if Jesse Winker had turned it around, you're talking about a guy who started the All-Star game that's now in your lineup basically for free because you didn't get that guy last year, on top of all the other moves you've made this offseason. But Colton Wong, certainly I think a better fit for what the Mariners need at this point, especially given that they already traded for Teoscar Hernandez. They have Julio Rodriguez already out there. They did lose Mitch Haniger, though, so, that's kind of a bummer. But for me, I think that Wong is a good fit, but I think you gave up a lot of upside to get him, so I think really feel like they overpaid a little bit here. But they didn't give up any prospects, which is nice. But for me, B- I think is fair, just because of, again, the major league upside that you gave up was pretty significant to get Colton Wong, even if he is a great fit, and even if you do need him a little bit more than you may have needed Winker and Toro. Now to the big boy. One of the big boys, I should say. Maybe not the big boy, because arguably it's not the big signing of the offseason. Jacob deGrom signs with the Texas Rangers, 5 years, $185 million. If you guys saw one of the shorts I put out over the last couple of weeks, you'll know what this grade is already going to be. It hasn't changed. My opinion hasn't changed. Nothing that anybody has said or anything is going to make me feel any different until I see something different. C+ is the grade I'm going to give for that. And again, it's not because Jacob deGrom is not worth the money or the annual value of money, because he is. He is the best pitcher in baseball when he is healthy. There's not really much of even an argument there. When he is putting it all together, he's nigh unhittable. So he's certainly a top-of-the-line franchise ace that you want if you're the Rangers. But for me, it's not necessarily a good fit for deGrom. I don't really see why, other than the money, why he would want to go there. He has no ties to the state of Texas whatsoever. They're not a contending baseball team. I know that they like to think that they're going to start contending in Texas, but signing Jacob deGrom and only doing that, and then a couple of other smaller signings here and there, that's not going to suddenly take you from losing 100 games to winning 100 games. They lost 99 games last year, or 98 games last year. Jacob deGrom, at the most, is probably going to get 15 wins, 20 wins. So even if you add 15 more onto that, you're still not even making the postseason. So for me, I don't understand why the Rangers chose to do this, or why Jacob deGrom really chose to go there instead of going to the Yankees or going to the Mets or going to anywhere else that he could have really, I would have gone to Houston if I was him. For me, that's what I would have done. I would have just gone to where the ring might have been. But again, you know what? Maybe the Rangers way overpaid and gave him way more money than what everybody else did, which, again, if that's what you need and that's what you want, good for Jacob deGrom, and I hope it works out. But for me, baseball-wise, as a fan, I just don't see the fit. So for me, C+, nothing to do with Jacob deGrom and his talent, although he is 35 and he does have a lot of injury history at this point, so you do have to be wary of that as well if you're the Rangers, especially 5 years. You're going to have him on your books until he's 40. So, you do have to be wary of that. But again, he's phenomenal. He is the best pitcher in baseball when he's healthy. He's certainly worth the annual value of the contract for any team. It doesn't matter if you're the Pittsburgh Pirates or the Yankees. It doesn't matter. You're going to be valued like that if you're Jacob deGrom for any team. But I just don't see the fit baseball-wise here for deGrom. Speaking of deGrom, his former team, the Mets, were able to sign his replacement pretty shortly after they lost him. Justin Verlander signs a 2-year, $86 million contract with the Mets. I'm going to give this an A-, and the reason why it's getting a minus is because I know for a fact they would have preferred to have Jacob deGrom, and if they had re-signed deGrom, it would have been an A+. But, obviously they didn't. But if you're going to lose Jacob deGrom, replacing him with Justin Verlander is pretty much best case scenario at this point. So certainly A- seems like a fair grade for me. It's as good as it gets. That's not Jacob deGrom. So good for the Mets there. And man, that two-headed monster of Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer reunited. Those of you who may not remember, Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander were on the same team at one point. And a lot of people say, man, if only they had stuck together, how dangerous could they be? Well, it's much, much later in both their careers, but they are going to be reunited in New York. So awesome for them. A- for me. The Angels, going back to another Angels signing, they signed Carlos Estevez, former former Rockies reliever to a 2-year, $13.5 million contract. I'm also going to give this deal an A-. A reliever that had a sub-4 ERA while pitching in Coors, count me in. I mean, good job. Fair for the Angels. They need more pitching help. They need more bullpen help, so good for them. Hopefully it works out. I don't really know much about Estevez as a player necessarily. Looking into his stats, though, considering he's in Coors, he had a pretty darn good season last year, so hopefully it works out for both parties there. On the surface, seems like a good deal. Another mammoth contract here. Trey Turner signs an 11-year, $300 million contract with the Phillies. It's always very tempting when you see a team shelling out this much money and getting a player the caliber of Trey Turner. It's always tempting to just immediately give it an A or an A+, but I don't like to look at things that way. I like to look at the totality of everything that comes about when these contracts go through. And for me, my initial reaction is a B+. It's not quite an A-, but it's going to be a B+. Now, I know Trey Turner is a phenomenal baseball player. He is one of the most valuable on both sides of the ball baseball players in the sport. He can hit home runs. He can hit for batting average. He can get on base. He can steal bases. He's a plus defender. All of that is absolutely true. But he's 30 years old. He's 30 years old. You have given him 11 years. Now, for the first 3 years, maybe even 5 years, this trade is going to look fantastic. Or not trade, but this signing is going to look fantastic for the Phillies. Absolutely. And you know what? If they win a World Series, or if they win 2 or 3 World Series with Trey Turner and Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber and Nick Castellanos and all these guys, then no one's going to really necessarily care too much 5, 6, 8, 10 years down the road when Trey Turner is, getting paid $30 million a year and is not effective whatsoever. But for me, I have to look at the whole totality of the contract. And Trey Turner is a guy that relies very, very heavily on his speed. And one of the first things that goes when you get older as an athlete is your speed. So, for me, I think that annual value-wise, Trey Turner's certainly worth the money, but the length of that contract is going to get really, really messy as the years go along. So, for me, B+, is where I'm going to go. He really, really fills out that lineup right now, though, doesn't he? That is a perfect complementary leadoff hitter, and I mean, you're really going to start to have a dangerous lineup over there. Already with Bryce Harper, already with Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, JT Realmuto, Alec Boehm. All these guys that are already there that are just ready to rock, and then you put Trey Turner in that mix, and that's a really solid lineup, man. That's tough. So again, good player, really fills out the lineup, but for me, I look at the whole of the contract, and I think that by the time, 5, 6, 7 years down the road, it's going to look pretty rough for the Phillies. But hey, you know what? Who cares in a way, right? Who cares? Trey Turner's going to go to the Phillies. He reunites with Bryce Harper, and I think, again, he's a great player. But B+ is as high as I'm willing to go, given the fact that it's going to look pretty rough by the time we get to year 5, 6, 7, and beyond. Cleveland Guardians. They had a relatively quiet offseason, but they did make this splash signing Josh Bell to a 2-year, $33 million contract. He does have an opt-out after his first year, however. So for me, I'm going to give it a B. It's not a bad move by any stretch of the imagination, but nothing that's going to be, earth-shattering or anything like that. For me, Bell is a pretty good player. He's got solid upside, but he is 30 years old. So, how much more upside can you really have at a certain point when you're 30 as a position player? And plus, if it doesn't really work out for either side, there is an opt-out at the end of the first season. There's always the trade possibility where he could get traded to a team that's contending a little bit more, or that he feels like he could perform a little bit better. For me, I think that this is a reasonably good deal. Nothing earth-shattering, though, so I think B is a fair assessment. One of my favorite signings here, one of my favorite moves here in the offseason coming up now, the Chicago Cubs signed Cody Bellinger to a one-year, $17.5 million deal. And I've talked about Cody Bellinger here on the channel a little bit. He is one of the most confounding and confusing players in all of baseball. But he is a former MVP, and I do think that he still has a lot to give the game. So this is going to get an A from me. The Cubs are not competing, so quite frankly, overpaying for 1 year for Cody Bellinger doesn't really matter in terms of the product you're going to put on the field. It doesn't stop them from getting like one more piece to really compete because they're not competing. They don't really have much talent outside of a couple of guys over there at this point. They're certainly in rebuild mode over there in Chicago. So for me, overpaying for 1 year to see what you're going to get out of Cody Bellinger, possibly, getting him out of the spotlight in LA and putting him in Chicago where fans are much more friendly and fans are, there's a lot less pressure to really perform every second of all the time. And you know what? He might return to form. And boy, howdy, if Cody Bellinger returns to form, you've got a former National League MVP on your roster that you can then re-sign and build the next kind of phase of your team around. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, it's just a 1 year contract, and then he leaves. And he goes somewhere else and tries to rebuild his reputation elsewhere. Or maybe he just goes to a contender for less money. And either way, it works out for him. So for me, I think it's a win-win for both sides. The Cubs get a guy that could possibly return to form. Because again, you just never know with Cody Bellinger year in and year out what you're going to get. So, a guy that could return to a possible MVP form for $17 million or just over $17 million. And if halfway through the season, he's really performing well and, he really wants to re-sign, you could give him $25 or $30 million a year for 4 or 5 years. And if he's returned to a close to MVP form, no one's going to bat an eye. No one. Because if he had done what he did in 2019 or in 2020, in 2021, 2022, he'd be a $300+ million player easily. So for me, I think it's a win-win. And for Cody Bellinger, you get a chance to have less pressure. You get a chance to go into a lineup where you're going to be put in the heart of the lineup every single night, no matter what. And you get a chance to rebuild your value and prove that you're still that MVP caliber player. So I think win-win for both sides. Definite A from me for the Cubs. Another Texas Rangers move. Andrew Heaney signs with the Texas Rangers, obviously, for 2 years, $25 million. But with incentives, it could be up to $37 million. I'm going to give this one a D+. I'm not impressed with the moves that the Rangers have made this offseason. They really are acting like a team that is ready to compete right now, and I just don't see it. And I don't really know I feel like they're the only ones that feel that way, because I don't even know if Rangers fans feel like they are ready to compete right now. Now, I could be wrong about that, obviously, but for me, Andrew Heaney is one of those pitchers that I'll never be able to trust again. Just watching him in LA, he's one of those guys, kind of like Matt Boyd in a lot of ways, where he gave up a lot of home runs. He had really, really great games, but at the same time, he had really, really bad games. You just never really knew what you were going to get out of him. In LA, he had a pretty okay year last year. He obviously started and threw in the bullpen, threw out of the bullpen sometimes. So for me, he's fine, but I don't think that even if he gets to max, peak Andrew Heaney form, I don't think he's worth the top end money in this contract. I wouldn't pay him $18 million a year. No matter if I got the very best version of Andrew Heaney, I still wouldn't pay $18 million for him. Now, that's a matter of opinion, obviously, but that's just me. Again, I feel like the Rangers think that this contract is going to put them in contention. Newsflash, it doesn't. At least to me. Moving on, Giants sign Mitch Haniger to a 3-year, $43.5 million contract. This is going to get my second A+ of the video. Easily, to me, my favorite deal of the offseason so far for really any team at this point. So, and the reason why is, one, I just love Mitch Haniger as a player. I think he's super, super undervalued. People think that he's not a good defender. He's actually a plus defender. He had about 3 defensive runs saved last year, which it's not in the negative, which means he's obviously slightly better than your average defender out in the outfield. So, and again, he gives you consistent pop. He's going to give you 30 home runs a year. Other than the one injury plagued season that he had in 2021. For me, he's been pretty healthy for his entire career. And I think he's a great fit in San Francisco. And that's a team that's really trying to find an identity, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. I think their pitching is pretty good, but offensively, I think that they're still kind of missing a couple key pieces that really could solidify what they've got going on there in San Francisco. And obviously, they were going after Aaron Judge as well, and that would have been a huge boon for the San Francisco Giants. But obviously, it didn't work out. We'll get into that in a little bit. But for me, he's consistent at the dish. He's a positive defender, as I talked about earlier. In 2022, or in 2021, excuse me, he was a minus defender. He was coming back from injury, but last year he proved that he could still be a good defender now that his injuries are kind of behind him at this point. Giants can insert him right into the lineup. He can play outfield. He can, be a designated hitter sometimes. And he's going to be a consistent presence for you if you are the Giants. And you're not paying a crazy amount of money. You're only paying, about 11, or not 11 million, but about, a little less than $15 million a year, which is really, really good for a guy that's going to give you what I think Mitch Haniger is going to give you if you are the Giants. So A+ for me, absolutely fantastic deal for both sides, I think. Moving on, more Philadelphia Phillies action. They signed Taijuan Walker to a 4-year, $72 million deal. I'm giving this an A-. I really like this deal. And you know what? Good for Taijuan Walker. He's one of those guys that I think has been criminally undervalued, whether in fantasy, whether just in, pundits' opinions, whether in all-star voting, whether in anything. He's a guy that has just been consistently there all the time. He's got a 3.5 to 3.8 ERA just about every year, which it's not phenomenal. It's not like a 2.3 ERA or something ridiculous, but he's been there. He's good, and sometimes he has been lower than that, obviously. For the most part, other than a couple of, he'll miss a game or two here or there, he hasn't had any crazy, long, ridiculous injuries in a few years at this point. So he's consistently available. He consistently gives you innings. He's an innings eater for sure. He'll give you 6, 7, 8 innings a night, even if he's not particularly effective on that given day. But the reason why it doesn't get an A or A+ grade for me is because when you go to Philadelphia at this point, with Ranger Suarez, with Aaron Nola, you're going to be a third or fourth starter. With Zach Wheeler there also, you're going to be at the most a fourth starter. Because obviously Suarez, you've got Nola, you've got Wheeler. Those are your top 3 guys right there. That's just what it's going to be. So Walker is effectively your fourth starter, and that's a lot of money to pay. You're paying almost, $20 million a season, about $18 million a season. That's what you're paying. That's a lot of money for a fourth starter, but you know what? The Phillies are going all in, and if you're going to get a consistent fourth starter, Taijuan Walker, you can't do much better than that. So good for Walker, good for the Phillies. I love this move. And you know what? Walker's still got some upside too. He's getting up there in age, but I think that there's still another level that he can unlock if he's put in the right position. So we'll see if that happens. But again, I think it really solidifies a scary-looking rotation and a scary-looking team, quite frankly, down there or up there in Philadelphia. Another Cubs signing. So they signed Jameson Taillon to a 4-year, $68 million contract. I'm giving this one a D+. Now, two very similar deals back-to-back, right? The one for Walker and the one for Taillon. Why are the grades so different? I think that's a fair question, and I want to really talk about that. I want to really sink my teeth into it. I think that Jameson Taillon is far too inconsistent for that kind of money. Now, obviously, there's, a lot of stuff coming out of Pittsburgh where it's like, they don't know how to handle high-quality starters. Garrett Cole, Jameson Taillon, Tyler Glasnow, spattering of others, obviously, as well. But for me, I just think that it doesn't really matter all that much. I think that Taillon, when he went to the Yankees, he was still very inconsistent. Now, he had a good year last year, for the most part, but I don't see him having that much value. I just don't see it. Now, he's still reasonably young. I think he's only 28, 29 years old at this point, so it's not like he's crazy high up there in age at this point. He still had a good year, and he's a good pitcher. I'm not saying he's a poor pitcher by any stretch of the imagination, but for me, I don't think I wouldn't want to. I'd rather have Zach Eflin. I really would. I'd rather have Zach Eflin, which is crazy to me because he has a lot of the same problems. But I'd rather pay $15 million a year for Zach Eflin than pay $20 million a year for Jameson Taillon. That's probably going to be a very unpopular opinion. Come at me. That's fine. The point is, look, just even comparing Taijuan Walker and comparing, Jameson Taillon, I don't think that he's older than Taijuan Walker. He's not nearly as consistent as Taijuan Walker. I think at this point, Taijuan Walker has more of an upside. I haven't really seen a ton of crazy upside from Jameson Taillon at this point. And you've got virtually the same contract. I mean, you're paying $1 million a year less for Jameson Taillon. I just think that it's not a good contract for the Cubs. But you know what? They don't really have much to lose at this point. They're not that great of a team. This guy's going to be there. Maybe he can develop into a good number 2 or number 3. But for me, it's just too much. It's just too much money. And I just don't think he's worth it right now. So that's a D+ for me. I don't really like that deal at all. Now, Taillon, obviously, had a really nice year with the Yankees. Speaking of the Yankees, here's the big one. Aaron Judge. The saga has ended for Aaron Judge and for baseball. We had no clue where Aaron Judge was going to go. But he ends up re-signing with the New York Yankees. 9 years, $360 million. A huge contract for Aaron Judge. And good for him. I think that he deserves it. I think that he deserves that annual value of the contract. But my grade is going to make some people upset, especially my Yankees fans that like to watch. I'm giving it a B. And the reason I'm giving it a B is multifaceted. So let's just get into it. Obviously, Aaron Judge, MVP last year. Had one of the best hitting seasons, arguably the best home run hitting season in the history of the American League. Obviously, he hit more home runs than anybody in the history of the American League last year. That's nothing to sneeze at. That is incredible. He led the Yankees to the AL East Division crown. He stayed healthy pretty much all year, right? Which is something that's been a concern for him. He hasn't really been able to put it all together because of the nagging injuries, but last year he was able to put it all together right in time for his contract to come up. And it's one of the best stories that baseball has produced in a long time. All of that is absolutely true. So he was going to get, quite frankly, the amount of money that he got, at least annually, he was going to get that no matter where he went. He was going to get, $35, $40 million a year no matter what. But much like the Trey Turner contract that I talked about earlier, 9 years is a long time to pay Aaron Judge. Now, this isn't like what we used to see with guys like Albert Pujols, guys like Prince Fielder, guys like, you name, you pick them, you name them, right? A lot of these big long-term contracts for guys that are going to be being paid well into their mid-30s, maybe even into their 40s, because a lot of those guys, specifically Albert Pujols, I want to talk about, they didn't have massive injury concerns in their 20s, right? So, you can understand, people wanting to give Miguel Cabrera, when he's 29 or 28, 29 years old, 10 years, because he's stayed healthy, he's been productive, he's earned that money. That's all well and good. A guy like Albert Pujols, he stayed healthy, he's been productive, he's earned that money. But what we learned from contracts like that is when you get older, you're a lot less effective, and your body starts to break down. And what scares me about Aaron Judge is his body has already been beaten up a lot in his 20s. That does not bode well for his 30s, guys. It just doesn't. And I know that we all want Aaron Judge to be Aaron Judge because this year was so much fun watching him, even as a Red Sox fan. I'm not a horrible human being to the point where I hate Aaron Judge. Like, I don't. I love great baseball. Aaron Judge is a fantastic baseball player, and it genuinely had been breaking my heart a little bit over the last 4 or 5 seasons to just watch him not be able to put it together, at least in huge part due to the fact that he couldn't stay out there for very long because he just kept getting hurt and injured and injured and injured. It sucked to watch. So to see this year and see him put it all together, it's been a lot of fun. It's been great to see. But, again, when you're going to pay a guy $9 million, or excuse me, not $9 million, when you're going to pay a guy for 9 years, you at the very least want that person to have a pretty solid injury history. Or have a style of play that you think can age well into their 30s, into their 40s. You got to give Miguel Cabrera credit. While he has obviously fell off a cliff in his late 30s and 40s, his style of play has translated reasonably well to today's baseball, and it hasn't crippled him to the point where the Tigers have just had to cut him, or my God, he's the worst. It's the worst contract in baseball history. Or if you're Chris Davis and you strike out 300,000 times a year, like that hasn't happened. And what scares me for Aaron Judge and for the Yankees is that he's been injury prone in his 20s. How bad is it going to be when he's in his 30s, mid-30s, and you're this deep into the contract? Now, I will say that if the Yankees did not pay him, there would have been riots in the streets of New York City at this point. I mean, I fully know that. So this is something the Yankees had to do, which is why, despite all the negative things I'm saying, I'm still giving it a B, because it had to happen, and Aaron Judge annually probably deserves that much money, especially considering his MVP campaign. But for me, I don't think it makes the Yankees any better than they were last year, because obviously all you're doing is re-signing a guy that you already had, and now you're not going to have that money to do all the other things you need to do. You already lost Jameson Taillon. So for me, I just don't see this move making much difference for what the Yankees' problems are. And I discussed them in a video last week. The Yankees were really going to be in big trouble if they lost Aaron Judge, but I think even if they did re-sign Aaron Judge, they're still in trouble because what they're doing right now is not good enough. And they chose to basically stand pat. And by standing pat, they're saying to you, nothing's going to change, and I don't think that's good if you're the Yankees. I think something's got to give. You got to try and hit some kind of reset button. Try something else, right? But they're choosing not to do that. And again, I think they had to re-sign Aaron Judge. Absolutely. But I'm concerned for the back end of this contract more than I am even for the Trey Turner contract because of Aaron Judge's prior injury history. So for me, I just think in today's baseball, being exactly the same is not going to cut it. With all the teams improving, all the teams kind of moving around. I mean, you think about what's been going on. The Houston Astros destroyed the Yankees, and obviously they lost Verlander, but they got some other pieces now, and who knows, they may even want to try and re-sign Carlos Correa at this point. But, you've got them, you've got the Rays who are trying to improve, you've got the Phillies over there in the National League, and the Mets that are, trying to improve, you got the Dodgers that are going to be the Dodgers every single year, no matter who they lose. So, and you got the Padres that are making moves. You've got a lot of teams that are going up, that are improving, that are making these big splashes. Now, not to say that Aaron Judge isn't a big splash, because he is, but he's the big splash that you've already had. So if you're going to keep him, you've got to do some other stuff too. And they just haven't done that as of yet. So for me, I just think that the Yankees roster is becoming too top-heavy, not a lot of depth, and in today's baseball, that's just not good enough. I don't think it's going to be good enough, so I'm giving it a B for those reasons, and I hope that makes sense. And obviously, I hope in a lot of ways I'm wrong, although I don't like the Yankees, so I want them to lose 162 games a year, but I don't want Aaron Judge to get this big contract, blow out his knees, and never be the same guy again. That would break my heart, but it's more likely to happen with him than it's likely to happen with a lot of these guys that have signed big contracts the last few years. And that's just the truth. That's just the truth. Moving on across the subway, the Mets signed Jose Quintana to a 2-year, $26 million contract. I'm just giving it a C. I'm not a big fan of Jose Quintana. I think that at this point in his career, he should be taking a lot smaller deals given his age and given the fact that for the last 3 or 4 seasons, he has been incredibly inconsistent, if not longer than that. Last year, really good year. He turned things around, both in Pittsburgh, which I talked about earlier, and in St. Louis once he was eventually traded over there. But for me, again, I just, do I want to pay Jose Quintana $13 million? I don't think that's really a great idea, but you know what? The Mets have the money to do it. They've got the money to spend. He really helps give them some pitching depth. He can be your 4th or 5th starter. He can come out of your bullpen. He can fill in spot starts for injuries. Whatever the case is, I think it's fine. It's not the worst deal in the world, but I'm never going to be a fan of paying Quintana that much money. So for me, it's right middle of the road at a C. Now, moving on, I spoke about St. Louis a second ago. St. Louis Cardinals made, I think, one of the most awesome moves of the offseason. Wilson Contreras signs a 5-year, $87.5 million contract, and that 5th year is a club option. So the Cardinals will have all the power in that year, obviously. I'm going to give this an A-. I love this move. I'm not quite ready to give it an A, just because that is a lot of money, and he is 30 years old, and you can see that's a pattern with me, right? I'm not the biggest fan of giving players that are 30, 31, 32 years old these big contracts, because a lot of times they don't work out. But you know what? That's baseball. That's the world we live in. So I try to kind of only let that minimally hit a lot of things, unless it's a giant contract, again, like the Judge one, or like the Turner one, or like the Xander Bogaerts one, which we'll get into later. But for me, Wilson Contreras is one of the best catchers in baseball. He's very, very high profile, and I think he is the perfect replacement for Yadi. After Yadi spent 20-plus years with the Cardinals at this point. And, man, I love it for Cardinals fans, because I know that a lot of them, including my friend Wyatt, who, if you haven't seen the interview that I've done with him, definitely go check that out. We talked a lot about this kind of stuff. Cardinals fans, I'm sure, are worried. Like, what were the Cardinals going to do? Who's going to catch for us? What's going to happen? Now, Wilson Contreras is certainly nowhere near the defender that Yadi is, but quite frankly, no one is. So I don't think trying to find a guy who's like that was your best bet. I just don't. So for me, I think that getting a guy like Contreras who's going to be a good defender but really solidify your lineup, which at the catcher position, let's be honest, for 20 years has been a below-average hitting spot for the Cardinals, and it's not going to be that way anymore. I absolutely love this move. But again, only reason it's not getting an A or an A+ is because he is 30 years old, and I think at this point, how much value is he going to give you behind the plate? He's played more outfield in Chicago in recent years. Is that kind of where you're leaning towards moving if you're the Cardinals at this point? Is he going to, and if that's the case, then, who's going to, you still need more catching help. So you still need more help at the 2 spot. So for me, I love it, but there are risky factors of it that I don't love for the Cardinals. But I just think it's a great story. So A- is where I'm going to go with that one. And moving from one of my favorite trades to just kind of another trade not a trade, but a signing. I don't know why I keep doing that. Another signing. The Oakland Athletics signed Aledmys Diaz to a 2-year, $14.5 million deal. I'm going to give it a C. Cool. I mean, I don't really have much to say about it. Diaz is a fine player. It's a fine contract. He's going to a team that stinks. Whatever. I don't really know. I'm just going to move on. Now, a couple of trades here for some NL East squads here that I want to kind of just touch on here. The Tigers traded the Tigers trade Joe Jimenez, not Jose Jimenez. That's not a person. Joe Jimenez to the Braves. really, really nice move, I think, for the Braves. I'm going to give them a B+ here. He's a good reliever. They lost Kenley Jansen in the offseason to the Red Sox, which, again, I will go into. So I think that he's a nice little replacement there. And he doesn't even have to really close because I think, at this point, Tyler Matzik has proven he can close. I think he's probably going to be your closer this year, barring any kind of trade or some other big signing for the Braves. But for me, I think it's a nice move. Again, Braves had a really good bullpen last year, and they're wanting to keep it that way this year. So Joe Jimenez, nice addition for them. I'm going to give it a C for the Tigers because, again, they stink. They traded a guy who had some value. Whatever. And the Mets, they trade for former Tampa Bay Ray Brooks Raley. I'm going to give it a B for the Mets. I don't really know too much about Raley, but he had a pretty good year last year, and the Mets at this point are going all in. They could use some more bullpen pieces. They could use some more lefties coming out of that pen as well. And for the Rays, again, it's a C because, you're not getting too much out of it, but Brooks Raley wasn't super important for your team, it doesn't seem like, so Moving on to a deal that definitely is not is the Mets signing David Robinson. Robertson. I don't know why I said David Robinson. That is a very famous basketball player. I'm having a hard time. I apologize for that. David Robertson to a 1-year, $10 million deal. I'm going to give that a B+. The Mets got themselves a very consistent setup guy that is going to really help solidify on the back end of that bullpen. So they trade for Brooks Raley. They get, David Robertson here. Obviously, they get Justin Verlander, Jose Quintana. So, you got a lot of solid pitching depth there just with these signings. And the Mets are certainly not shy about spending money, are they? And we're not done. They have more moves coming as well. That's nice. It's not super flashy. The guy's 37 years old. He's just consistent. He stays healthy. He knows what he's doing. There's nothing that guy has not done in baseball at this point. So it's really, really solid move to get Edwin Diaz, a setup guy. And plus, you get him away from the Phillies, which is another thing that's nice for the Mets, obviously competing in that division. And another Mets signing. They re-signed Brandon Nimmo to an 8-year, $162 million contract. So obviously $20 million per year for Brandon Nimmo. Good for Nimmo. I'm going to give this a B- though for the Mets because they were certainly going to be in on Judge at this point because the Mets are just spending money like they're like the apocalypse is coming. But again, with him staying across the subway with the Yankees, they went and re-signed their stud outfielder instead. He's a guy who, he knows the organization well. The organization knows them well. He's earned that money. They re-sign him. Again, long contract, not as long as the other ones. He's not going to be a guy that's going to be, a burner for you. He's not going to be a guy that's going to, be in the MVP conversation, barring craziness this year, obviously, unless he has an unbelievable year or something. But for me, he's not going to be, your MVP guy. $20 million per year. It's that's not any kind of crazy number or anything like that. So, it's not a C+ or a C, but it's a B-. I think it's something that the Mets really had to just go ahead and get done. So B- for me. Nationals sign Trevor Williams to a 2-year, $13 million deal. I'm going to give it a C-. Nothing really special about this trade here. Trevor Williams has been very, very inconsistent. He's got another shot here to revamp his career with the Nationals, who, again, it's a pitcher that quite frankly is going nowhere and a team that's quite frankly going nowhere. So I'm giving it a C-. The Phillies sign Matt Strahm to a 2-year, $15 million contract. Took him away from the Red Sox. He's one of the few Red Sox relievers that didn't completely stink last year. So good for the Phillies. And again, more bullpen depth for the Phillies at this point. And again, they're going to be one of the favorites to win it all next year, if not the absolute favorite at this point. And also, with the loss of David Robertson that I just talked about, it really helps them get some more flexible options in that setup role for the Phillies. And we'll see if they have any more moves to make as time goes along. But as of right now, nothing has come up past these moves. Last move I want to talk about that is, kind of a major signing that doesn't have to do with the Red Sox, obviously, is going to be the Blue Jays signing Kevin Kiermaier to a deal. And as of the recording of this video, as of the time I kind of put all this together, the details in terms of the money has not come out yet. When that does come out, I will probably kind of put like a little update in the description for you guys, my grade for it, what I really think about it. So it's going to be determined right now. I'm not going to give a grade for it because obviously it's really going to depend on how much they're paying for him. He turned down $13 million from the Rays this year. So my guess is it's probably going to be around that, if not more, which I'm not sure how much he's worth that. But for me, I think it's a great fit for the Blue Jays. So if they were willing to get him on a cheap deal, I'm going to probably give this a B+ or an A- because I think he's a good player. I think he's obviously a phenomenal defender. We all know how good of an arm he has. We all know how great his glove is. His bat, not all that great. But in Tampa, it was even worse because he was, top of the lineup a lot or middle of the lineup a lot. But in Toronto, he's going to be your 8 or 9 hole hitter. So for me, you can be a below average hitter and a fantastic defender if you're going to be, in the 9 spot on a team that's going to be competing for a World Series. Because again, we all forget how great the Blue Jays looked on paper last year, and they are trying to get better this year. So my guess is if it's a reasonable contract, I'm probably going to give it a B+ or an A-. If it's a bad contract, I'll probably give it a B- or a B. But I like it. I like the fit anyway. I think that he fits much better than Teoscar Hernandez would have this year for what the team needs. I think he's a great locker room guy. He's been to a World Series. He knows what it takes to win. So I think that it's a great fit for the Blue Jays and for Kiermaier. Obviously, with the center field kind of not having that defensive presence since Kevin Pillar left a few years ago, I think that Kiermaier is going to be great for the Blue Jays. And now I want to just kind of talk about a couple of minor deals. I'm not really going to give grades on these. Just a couple of minor deals I wanted to tell you guys about. The Orioles signed Kyle Gibson to a $10 million contract and Nomar Mazara to a $1.5 million deal. The Pirates signed Vince Velasquez to a $3.15 million deal and Harlan Garcia to a $2.5 million deal, as well as a club option for 2024. Jace Peterson has signed a contract with the A's, although I could not find the financials for that one. Tommy Kahnle re-ups with the Yankees for 2 more years, so the veteran reliever goes back to the Yankees. And then the Mariners actually traded Kyle Lewis over to the Diamondbacks for another struggling major leaguer in Cooper Hummel. So after that, now we get right into the Red Sox deals this offseason, and as you guys know, I'm going to have a lot to say about what has been going on with the Red Sox. Let's kind of go in chronological order here. The Red Sox will start off with the Chris Martin signing, 2 years, $17.5 million. I'm going to give it a B+. Slight overpay, I think, for Chris Martin. I don't think he's going to particularly give you a lot of saves. He's not going to really be, a top-of-the-line, not rotation, but bullpen guy for you. But he is a solid bullpen piece. But, even if it is a slight overpay, it's nothing really egregious. And the Sox bullpen, they have, the Sox have money, obviously. They're the Red Sox. They have the money for it. And the bullpen was absolutely horrible last year. So any help that we're going to be able to get for the bullpen is going to be good for me. B+. Simple as that. Not really too much else to talk about with that. And speaking of getting more bullpen help, the Red Sox then went and signed Kenley Jansen to a 2-year, $32 million contract. I'm going to give this one an A-. Kenley Jansen is not my favorite player. I know that he's been one of the most effective closers in the game, but he's had his struggles in the postseason. He's had his struggles in big moments in the past, which scares me when you're a closer, obviously. But again, the Red Sox really, really need help in the bullpen, and Matt Barnes is just not the answer at this point as the closer. So for me, if you're going to get a guy, get Kenley Jansen. He's been there and done that. He's been to several World Series. He's won a World Series. He's been to the Braves now at this point, and he had a pretty effective year last year, even though he's getting up there in age. So for me, again, he's going to be the closer, barring any kind of injury or some other catastrophe or a big trade or something. He's going to be the closer for the Red Sox this year. Certainly an upgrade over what we've had. $16 million is about where I figured he would be commanding this offseason, and that's, if you want a top-of-the-line closer, that's what you're going to have to pay. So, nice move for the Red Sox. A-, I think, is very, very fair. But again, I do have some concerns about Kenley Jansen that I don't think a lot of other people really have consistently, but that's just my opinion. And I hope that those fears don't come to light, and especially now that he's wearing a Red Sox uniform. Then, shortly after that, the Red Sox then signed Japanese phenom Masataka Yoshida to a 5-year, $90 million contract, and also had a $15.4 million payout to his Japanese club, which means the total money that they have paid for Yoshida will be 5 years, $105.4 million. I'm giving this one an A- as well. Now, to say that I know a whole ton about Yoshida would just be a lie, because I live in America and he's in Japan, and I don't particularly follow a whole ton of Japanese baseball because I just don't have time to, quite frankly. But for me, just hearing the things that I've heard about him and reading up on him and kind of looking at his statistics, his advanced stats, stuff like that, he's obviously a contact king. He gets on base a ton. He doesn't strike out a lot, and he's a good defender. So I think it's exactly what the Red Sox need in their lineup right now. Their outfield has just not been great. Alex Verdugo's pretty good, but other than that, Jackie Bradley Jr. is just not, he was never going to be the answer. And then a smattering of others that just, haven't really worked out. Jaron Duran hasn't worked out. Rob Refsnyder's been fine, but is he really your long-term answer? I don't think so. So I think getting a guy that can be at the top of your lineup, or heck, even the bottom of your lineup, that's going to get on base a lot, not going to strike out a ton, and he's going to play good defense, I think it's a great signing for the Red Sox. Only reason that this does not get an A or an A+ for me is I am concerned a little bit about his age. A lot of times you see Japanese guys having to wait a few years to come over. Ichiro didn't come over until he was 26. Shohei Ohtani didn't come over until he was 25. But he's 29. Yoshida is 29. That is, now you're already getting to the point where, your prime is, you're at the right tail end of your prime at this point. So, for me, that scares me a little bit. But you know what? It's not a crazy long deal. 5 years isn't that bad. So, for me, I think it's a really, really good deal for the Red Sox. And we'll just hope that he pans out better than Daisuke did. Now, here is where this is going to get a little wonky for me. I'm going to talk about the Xander Bogaerts signing for the Padres at this point, even though he didn't sign with the Red Sox, because obviously Xander Bogaerts has played for the Red Sox for the past decade. So I'm very sad to see him go. I really am. But here are my thoughts on it, really. I just don't like the Padres in this at all. I really don't. And here's what I mean. So obviously, for those of you who don't know, Xander Bogaerts signed with the San Diego Padres on an 11-year, $280 million contract. It's huge for Xander. $20 million less than what Trey Turner got, I think, in a nutshell, is about right. You could argue that he's a little bit less valuable because he doesn't really steal bases. He's not the best defender. He's not a great defender like Trey Turner is. So I can understand him being paid less. But for me, what really gets me is the 11 years. That's what gets me. So my snap grade for this, for the Padres, it's a C-. I honestly, if I didn't love Xander Bogaerts and have seen him play for the last decade, I'd probably be giving this a D+ or a D. That's how much I don't like this trade for the Padres, or this trade. I keep saying that. I'm so sorry, guys. This signing for the Padres, I just don't like it at all. I don't think he fits on that team very well. I don't think I don't think his style of play fits. I don't think the contract fits. And I really don't like how negative Red Sox fans have been towards Hein Bloom for not giving Xander Bogaerts that kind of money. He shouldn't have given Xander Bogaerts that kind of money. Now I want to clarify, I do not mean he should not have given that annual value of money. Absolutely, he should have. And for those of you who don't know, the final numbers kind of came in. The Red Sox were at about 6 years, $160. That I think was the final offer for Xander Bogaerts. And if that's what the Padres signed him for, even if they signed him for 6 years, 180, I'd have been like, ooh, $30 million a year for Xander. That's probably an overpay, but you know what? That's fine. That would have been a much better grade for me. But the fact that they gave Xander Bogaerts 11 years, there was no reason to give him 11 years. None whatsoever. I don't understand why they felt the need to do that. I would be shocked if other teams were giving him that. Now, it's not like, the Red Sox were giving him 6 years, 160, and the Giants were wanting to give him 10 years, and the Yankees were wanting to give him 10 years, and the Astros were wanting to give him 10 years, and the Red Sox just wildly underpaid. To my knowledge, that's not what happened. Now, obviously, as more details come out, that may end up being what happens, and if that's the case, then we can have a conversation about the Red Sox not wanting to pay Xander. But for me, I just don't see why you had to pay Xander for 11 years. I mean, that's just a bad idea. Look, I've seen Xander play for the last 10 years. His style of play is not going to age well. He's already not a good defender. He does not play any other position other than shortstop. He refuses to, by the way. He already has said in interviews, oh no, I'm a shortstop. Like, he's not moving anywhere. He's not going to want to play second base without dropping that humility, which he's a fantastic player, so I understand him not wanting to move. But for me, again, 11 years is just too many years. It really, really is. And another thing is, the Padres have a ton of guys that can already play shortstop. Obviously, Fernando Tatis Jr., right? Manny Machado has played a lot of shortstop in his career at this point. Hae-Sung Kim is another guy that can play shortstop. Jake Cronenworth is another guy that can play shortstop. And now you got Xander Bogaerts. All these guys, I mean, and these aren't just like major league guys that are like Xander is clearly better than all of them. Like, no. I don't think he's clearly better than Manny Machado. I don't think he's clearly better than Fernando Tatis. He's probably better than Jake Cronenworth, although Jake Cronenworth is an all-star, so he's pretty darn good as well. He's better than Kim, obviously. But, these guys are fantastic players already that can play shortstop, so I just don't understand why Xander Bogaerts was the guy, if you're the Padres, to shell out an 11-year contract to. I just don't see it. So for me, I'm giving it a C- just because I don't see the fit. I don't understand why you had to pay 11 years. And again, I'll say this. For those of you who are angry that the Red Sox did not give Xander Bogaerts an 11-year contract, I can promise you, in 4 years, you would be so thankful that they did not give him that contract. Now, I get it, right? You let Mookie go. You let Xander go. Now, Rafael Devers might be going, right? And instead, you paid Trevor Story, JD Martinez. Guys that didn't come from your organization, you're choosing them over the homegrown guys. I get that frustration, and that frustration is very valid. I feel it too. But do you really think that the Red Sox should have given him 11 years? Because I think if you're a Red Sox fan, I would have never given him that. No matter how good of a player he is, given his age and given his skill set. I'm sorry. I just wouldn't have. I think Chaim Bloom was right to say 6 years, 160. That's about as much. Because guess what? That's more annual value. That is more annual value than what the Padres were giving him. The Padres just decided to go crazy and give a guy who's 30 years old, only plays one position, and doesn't have, a skill set that's really going to age well, quite frankly, in my opinion. 11-year contract. That's just a bad idea if you're the Padres, for me anyway. So, for those of you wanting to crucify Chaim Bloom at this point, don't. I understand that it hasn't been the best. I understand that he's made moves that don't make sense sometimes. But for this particular thing, I think he's in the right. I don't think he should have given him 11 years and $300 million. I just don't. I didn't think the Phillies should give Trey Turner 11 years, $300 million either. But you know what? They're at least competing for a World Series. You're going to tell me that the Red Sox are ready to compete for a World Series right now with that roster? Heck no. Their starting rotation is still dog crap. It just is. Even if Chris Sale comes back healthy, and even if Nathan Eovaldi comes back healthy, Who else do you have? James Paxton hasn't pitched in 2 years. What else do you have? A 49-year-old Rich Hill? Like, come on, guys. It's not. We're not going to compete for a World Series for a couple of years at this point. Just let Shane Bloom do what he's got to do. Hopefully he re-signs Devers, because if he doesn't re-sign Devers, then I'm going to have a problem. Because Devers deserves a lot of money. He deserves to stick around. He should be a franchise cornerstone at his age. The fact that he got way better defensively last year, and before he got hurt, he was having a great year, and then he kind of fell off a little bit after that. But the point is, he needs to stick around, for sure. And if he doesn't re-sign, then that's a big problem. Because I give that guy whatever he wants. You know, he's not 30 years old like Trey Turner. He's not 30 years old like Xander. He's not 30 years old like Judge. He's 25 or 26 or 24, however the heck old he is. Yeah, you can give him a 10-year, 11-year, 12-year contract. That's fine. But regardless, I don't like this. I don't like this signing. I really don't like this signing. If you know, for the Padres. Now, again, I understand why they did it. If you want to move Tatis to the outfield, obviously Machado's your full-time third baseman. I guess they're going to move Cronenworth to first base, which I guess. And then you have Kim at second base. And then obviously now your outfield, you got Grisham, you got Tatis, right? Like, yeah, that's a pretty good lineup. And they've already got a good rotation. But for me, man, to pay that much for it? I don't know, guys. That's just me, though. But, whew, it has been a long video. If you guys stuck around to the end, you know, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. And this has been one of my favorite videos to do. I worked very hard on it. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. And there's not really going to be any other videos coming out this week, probably. Unless I decide to clip some things just because I really liked it, or I liked what I said about it, or I think that it could work for a short, or whatever it is. I don't anticipate a lot of stuff coming out after this, so hopefully you guys enjoy this kind of long video. And if you didn't enjoy it, I'm very sorry, but I did the best I could. But either way, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Hey guys, me again. I just want to say thank you so much for checking out the Lopes Goes Last podcast. It means the world to me that you decided to stick all the way to the end. That's super cool. So thank you again. And if you really like what you see, I'd love for you to subscribe, like the video, and share it with all your family and friends, because, you know, this is my passion project. This is what I love to do, and I really want the sucker to grow. And the only way that can happen is through you guys, is if you guys can help me out. So again, if you like what you saw, please subscribe, like the video, share it with all your friends and family. That's the only way this is going to grow. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.